Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. And today, we're going to be talking about walkable neighborhoods.
Yes. One of my favorite topics.
I figured you'd like this one. We're going to be looking at the work of Dominic Nozzi.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's a city planner, and he's got some pretty strong opinions about how we should be designing our cities.
I like strong opinions.
Me too.
Yeah.
It makes things more interesting.
Whoa, absolutely.
So just a heads up, it's Nozzi, not Nazi, like jazzy with an O.
Gotcha, Nazi.
Exactly. So he's got this Substack called Dom Nozzi's Timeless, Lovable, Walkable Neighborhood Design.
Catchy.
Yeah. And even the article titles are pretty attention-grabbing.
Oh, like what?
Well, like why are roads so dangerous for pedestrians? Yeah. Or the war zone.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah. You sent me a bunch of his articles, and I got to say, this guy's got me thinking differently about my own city.
Well, that's always a good sign, right?
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive in and see what Nozzi has to say about making our cities more walkable, more lovable, and more people-centered. Where should we start?
Well, one thing that really jumps out from his writing is his passion for pedestrian safety.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about the number of pedestrian deaths, especially in South Carolina where he lives.
Right. It's a serious issue and one that's often overlooked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So from your perspective as an urban design expert, what are some of the factors that contribute to this danger for pedestrians?
Well, Nozzi doesn't go into a ton of detail in these particular articles, but I can tell you from my experience that there are a few common culprits.
Okay. Like what?
Well, first of all, you got wide roads.
Yeah, those are everywhere.
Exactly.
Roads
Designed to
stop.
move cars as quickly as possible.
Right. Make those cars go fast.
And that often leaves pedestrians feeling like an afterthought.
Yeah. You're dodging cars left and right,
Yeah.
just trying to cross the street.
Exactly. You also have inadequate crosswalks, poor lighting, lack of sidewalks. All of these things play a role.
It's true. It's like some places are just designed as if people walking are an inconvenience.
Yeah. Like
Right.
they're not supposed to be there.
Yeah. Right. And here's a fact that really surprised me. Nozzi says that it's actually statistically safer to be a pedestrian in a city than in the suburbs.
Interesting.
Right. I mean, you'd think it would be the other way around.
Well, it's counterintuitive. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
When you think about it, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. How so?
Well, think about typical suburban design.
Okay. Wide roads, big houses.
Wide roads encouraging high speeds, long distances between destinations, and often a real lack of pedestrian infrastructure.
So if you're not in a car, you're kind of out of luck.
Exactly. Now, cities, while they can be denser, they often have lower speed limits.
Yeah, sure.
More pedestrians overall, which means drivers have to be more aware.
So it's not just about where you live,
Yeah.
but how that environment is designed.
Exactly. The design makes all the difference.
Now I got to ask about this article titled The War Zone.
Oh, yeah. That one caught my eye, too.
What's Nozzi waging war on exactly?
Well, believe it or not, he's talking about the constant noise of emergency vehicle sirens in cities. Yeah. He argues that this creates a really stressful and even harmful environment for residents.
So not the kind of war zone I was picturing.
No, not quite. But I can see his point.
Yeah. It's like a constant assault on your senses.
Yeah.
I mean, is this something that urban planners are really concerned about?
It's definitely gaining more attention. We've known for a long time that noise pollution can be detrimental to our health and well-being,
Yeah, sure.
but it's often overlooked. When we're designing cities, we tend to focus on the visual aspects,
How it looks.
right, and traffic flow. But Nozzi's saying we need to think about sound, too. Design for the ears as well as the eyes.
I've definitely been in some cities where that noise is just overwhelming. It makes you want to escape.
Absolutely. And it's not just about annoyance. Studies have shown that chronic noise exposure can lead to all sorts of problems.
Like what?
Increased stress, sleep disturbances, even cardiovascular problems.
Wow, that's serious.
It's like having your fight or flight response constantly triggered, which takes a toll on your body.
So Nozzi's saying we need to be more mindful of the soundscape we're creating in our cities.
Exactly. Not just for aesthetic reasons, but for the health of the people who live there.
That's a really important point. I think we often take for granted the impact that our surroundings have on us.
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly being influenced by our environment, whether we realize it or not.
So it sounds like Nozzi's advocating for a more holistic approach to urban design.
Yeah.
One that considers not just how things look, but how they sound and how they make people feel.
Exactly. He's looking at the big picture.
Now that leads us to another one of his articles, Public Safety and the Law of Unintended Consequences.
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. He basically argues that even well-intentioned design choices can sometimes backfire. especially when it comes to safety.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, cities are complex systems, right?
Yeah, you can't always predict how things will play out.
Exactly. So can you give us an example of how this law of unintended consequences might play out in urban planning?
Sure. Think about widening a road. Okay, done that all the time.
Oh.
Supposed to improve traffic flow.
Yeah, seems logical, right? More space for cars. But what often happens is that wider roads encourage drivers to speed.
Oh yeah, you got more room to go faster.
Exactly. Which, ironically, can make the street more dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists.
So it's the opposite of what you intended.
Exactly. Or consider building more parking lots.
Okay. Got to accommodate all those cars.
Right. But this can actually lead to increased car dependency.
People drive more because it's so easy to park.
Exactly. And it makes it harder to create walkable, vibrant neighborhoods.
So you're trying to make things better, but you end up making them worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nozzi's point is that we need to think beyond the immediate impact of a design choice.
Yeah, look at the big picture.
Right. And consider the potential ripple effects.
It's like a chess game. You have to think several moves ahead.
Exactly. You can't just focus on one piece. You have to consider the whole board.
That's a great analogy.
And that's what makes urban planning so complex and fascinating. You're dealing with a dynamic system where every element is interconnected.
And every decision has consequences.
Exactly. You have to be very careful.
Now, speaking of counterintuitive ideas, I got to ask about Nozzi's road diets.
Road diets, what is that?
This is where he suggests actually reducing the number of lanes on some roads.
Really?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but he swears it can work.
I'm skeptical but intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the idea is to reclaim some of that space for other uses,
Right.
like bike lanes, wider sidewalks, green spaces, things like that.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about making the road narrower, it's about using that space differently.
Exactly. And the surprising thing is that sometimes it can actually improve traffic flow.
Really? I mean, I can see how it might slow things down.
Well, it can reduce congestion and bottlenecks, believe it or not.
Okay, I'm listening. So how does that work?
Well, imagine a 4-lane road that's always jammed.
Okay. Easy to imagine that.
You reduce it to 2 lanes, you'd think traffic would back up even more.
Right. Yeah. Seems logical.
But what often happens is that drivers become more cautious and attentive.
Because they have less room to maneuver.
Exactly. And that can actually lead to a smoother flow of traffic.
Interesting. So it's like a psychological thing.
Partly. Plus, you've now created space for bike lanes, which encourages people to choose alternative modes of transportation.
So you're getting some cars off the road completely.
Exactly. Which further reduces congestion.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could work. So it's about slowing things down strategically to actually improve the overall flow.
Exactly. And creating a more balanced transportation system.
So it's not just about cars anymore. It's about all the different ways people move around the city.
Exactly. And that's what Nozzi's advocating for. A shift away from our car-centric thinking towards a more holistic approach that considers the needs of all road users.
It sounds like a pretty radical shift.
Yeah, it is, but I think he makes a compelling case.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued to hear more about his ideas. This is giving me a whole new way to look at my own city.
That's what I'm talking about. It's all about changing our perspective.
I think we need a break. Let all this sink in.
Yeah, good idea. Let's take a pause and come back with more from Dominic Nozzi. All right, we're back. And you know, what really strikes me about Nozzi is that he doesn't just complain about what's wrong with cities.
Right. He's actually
Really?
trying to fix them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's got all these ideas for how we can make them better.
That's a problem solver.
Totally. And he's not afraid to challenge the status quo.
Like with his idea about narrowing streets.
Yeah, that one threw me for a loop at first.
Right. I mean, most people would assume that narrower streets equal more traffic.
Right, more congestion.
But as we were just discussing, sometimes that's not actually the case.
It's all about how you design the space.
Exactly. And how you manage traffic flow.
It's funny how we tend to think about cities from the perspective of a driver.
Yeah, we're so car-centric in our thinking.
Totally. And Nozzi's really trying to shift that perspective.
To see the city through the eyes of a pedestrian, a cyclist, someone who's not in a car.
Exactly. He wants us to think about how people experience the city, not just how cars move through it.
Like when I visited Copenhagen a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. How was that?
It was amazing. It felt so livable because everything was designed for people, not cars.
I've heard great things about Copenhagen.
It was so easy to walk and bike everywhere, and it felt safe.
So that's the kind of vision Nozzi is promoting.
Absolutely. He's a big advocate for what's called human scale design.
What does that mean exactly?
It's about creating spaces that feel comfortable and inviting for people, not intimidating or dominated by cars.
So instead of prioritizing how quickly cars can move through a space, it's about how people experience that space.
Exactly.
Okay.
Think about the difference between walking down a wide, busy street with no trees versus strolling along a narrow, tree-lined street with cafes and shops.
Yeah, one feels stressful and the other feels relaxing.
Exactly. And that's what human scale design is all about, creating spaces that feel good to be in.
I think that ties back to his concern about the war zone of sirens, too.
How so?
Well, maybe part of the reason that noise is so overwhelming in some cities is because there's no visual or spatial buffer.
Ah, I see what you mean. Like there's nothing to soften the sound.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
just this constant barrage.
Yeah. And when streets are designed primarily for cars, there's less space for trees, landscaping, other elements that could help absorb sound.
Right, so it's not just about making cities quieter. It's about creating spaces where people can actually enjoy being outside.
Exactly. Reclaiming our streets and public spaces as places for people, not just vehicles.
And when you do that, all sorts of good things happen.
Like what?
Well, people are more likely to walk, bake, interact with their neighbors.
Yeah, when their environment is designed to be welcoming and enjoyable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's amazing how interconnected all these concepts are.
You really are. It's all part of the same puzzle.
We started talking about pedestrian safety, and now we're talking about the social fabric of a community.
It's all linked.
And that's what makes Nozzi's work so compelling. He sees the big picture.
Yeah. He understands how these seemingly small design choices can have a ripple effect on the entire urban ecosystem.
So what other bold ideas does Nozzi have up his sleeve?
Well, one that often gets people riled up is his stance on parking requirements.
What does he say about those?
He argues that cities should reduce or even eliminate minimum parking requirements for new developments.
Wait, really? But where will people park?
I know, it sounds crazy, but hear him out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Nozzi argues that mandating a certain number of parking spaces actually contributes to sprawl.
How so?
Well, it encourages developers to build out instead of up.
To use more land.
Exactly, and it increases car dependency.
Because you have to drive everywhere since there's nowhere to park.
Right, and it makes
Yeah.
it harder to create those walkable, vibrant neighborhoods we were talking about.
Okay, so how does reducing parking requirements solve those problems?
Well, think about it. When developers are required to build a ton of parking, it drives up the cost of housing.
That makes sense.
And it often results in those huge, unattractive parking lots that dominate so much of our urban landscape.
Yeah, you know the ones I'm talking about.
Exactly. They discourage walking, and they create dead zones within a neighborhood.
So by reducing parking requirements, you free up space for other things.
Exactly. Like housing shops, parks, amenities that make a neighborhood more attractive and livable.
And you encourage people to get out of their cars.
Exactly. Because parking becomes less of a given.
So it's about shifting the balance away from cars and towards people.
Precisely. Instead of designing our cities around the assumption that everyone will drive everywhere, we're designing them for people who might choose to walk, bike, take public transportation.
Or just stay in their neighborhood and enjoy what it has to offer.
Exactly. It's about giving people more options.
And making our cities more livable and sustainable.
Exactly. And ultimately, more human.
It's a pretty radical idea, but I kind of like it.
Me too. It's definitely food for thought.
I think we need another break to let all this sink in.
Agreed. This is a lot to process.
All right, we're back. And, you know, one thing that keeps coming back to me is this idea that Nozzi's really trying to create cities that foster a sense of community.
Yeah. It's not just about the physical design. It's
Yeah.
about the social fabric, too.
Exactly. He's not just talking about sidewalks and bike lanes. He's talking about creating places where people actually want to be.
Where they feel connected to their neighbors,
Yeah.
their surroundings.
Right, and that goes back to what we were saying about reducing parking requirements.
Ah, how so?
Well, if you don't have a guaranteed parking spot right there at your building, you're more likely to walk a little bit. Explore the neighborhood. Maybe run into some people, you know?
Yeah, instead of just driving straight into your garage, going up to your apartment, and never interacting with anyone.
Exactly. It forces you to engage with your surroundings a bit more.
And that ties into another one of his big ideas, mixed-use development.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
It's about creating neighborhoods where you have a mix of residential, commercial, recreational spaces, all within walking distance.
Ah, so you could theoretically live your whole life without ever getting in a car.
Well, maybe not your whole life, But you could certainly get a lot done without a car.
Yeah, grab your coffee, pick up some groceries,
Mm.
meet a friend for lunch, maybe even go to work.
Exactly. It's about creating that village feel within a city.
Where everything you need is right there.
Right. And think about the benefits. Less driving means less traffic congestion, less air pollution.
Right. And more walking means a healthier population.
Exactly. And when people are out and about interacting with each other, it strengthens the social fabric of the community.
It's amazing how these design choices can have such a ripple effect.
It's all connected.
So it's not just about aesthetics. It's about creating environments that support our well-being on multiple levels.
Exactly. And that's something I really appreciate about Nozzi. He recognizes that cities are more than just concrete and steel.
Yeah, they're places where people live, work, play, connect with each other.
Right. And he wants to design cities that reflect that.
He uses the word lovable to describe his ideal neighborhoods.
Lovable.
Yeah.
That's not a word you hear very often in urban planning circles.
Or this is a good word.
It is, because we want to create cities that people actually love, not just tolerate.
Right. And I think that's what Nozzi is getting at. It's about designing for the human experience.
Yeah. Not just the efficient movement of vehicles.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into Dominic Nozzi's work.
Yeah, he's given us a lot to think about.
For sure.
Yeah.
He's challenged a lot of my assumptions about how cities should be designed.
I think the key takeaway here is that the way we design our cities has a direct impact on our lives.
On our health, our happiness, our sense of community.
And ultimately, on our ability to thrive as human beings.
So we have a choice to make. Do we want to continue prioritizing cars above all else? Or do we want to create cities that are truly designed for people?
And if you're listening, we want to leave you with this question. What small changes could you advocate for in your own community to make it more walkable, more lovable, more connected?
Maybe it's planting more trees, pushing for better sidewalks, supporting local businesses that contribute to a vibrant street life.
Every little bit helps.
It all adds up.
Yeah.
And if Dominic Nozzi has inspired you to reimagine your city, we encourage you to check out his Substack.
It's full of great ideas and practical advice.
All right, folks. That's it for another deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those sidewalks bustling.